DIY.
DIYers. We are here. We are here. We are here. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for tapping in to a very special interview, a very special conversation that I'm having. I'm having with the professor today, Professor Timothy Welbeck. First and foremost, sir, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being on today.
Yeah, you've had the internet on fire since the announcement of this Kendrick Lamar course. And of course, we're going to get into that. But I definitely want to make sure that we get the people understanding who you are, your history, and we'll transition right into this. But I definitely appreciate you being here with us today. For those that don't know, I'm sitting today down here with Timothy Welbeck, a civil rights attorney, scholar, MC, and the professor behind the Temple University's new Kendrick Lamar course coming this fall. He's originally from Memphis and Atlanta. He now leads groundbreaking work in Philadelphia, where he blends law, culture, and music to shift how we think about higher ed or hip hop in higher ed. That's the introduction I got for you. But in your own words, tell us who Timothy Welbeck is.
And thank you again for that gracious introduction. I think I'm gonna have to borrow that bio as I'm putting things out. But the short end of it, I think you captured it. I am the director for the Center of Anti-Racism at Temple University, where I'm also a professor, and that's what got us here today. I'm a civil rights attorney by training and practice. I still practice law. Before I was doing all of that, I rapped. I still do on occasion. I write, I speak, and it just, in a lot of ways, I try to leverage my different gifts and talents in a way that will uplift our people, better our community, and the like. And so whether it's in the classroom, the courtroom, community events, and the like, I try to do that. And then I feel like my most important roles are in my home. I'm a husband and father, got 3 children here. And so that's the short end of it all.
Man, and I definitely understand. You got to add that last part, because you know how many times I got off of a conversation or interview, and my wife is like, "So that's all you are, huh?" I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna change that introduction."
Absolutely.
With that said, though, growing up in Memphis and Atlanta, how do you feel like that prepared you for the work that you do today?
Oh man, that's a great question. So I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. Grew up right outside of Atlanta. And one of the things I like to say is that I'm a true African American, and that my father was born in Ghana and my mother was born in Memphis. And so in a lot of ways, I lived that tension between being African and American, just having this sense of being from a place that I'm not of in terms of Ghana. And then also being born in a place that was in a lot of ways pivotal to the civil rights and freedom movement. And so I came up hearing stories of King and the sanitation worker strike. My uncle went to some of those protests at the time. My mother was a schoolgirl when King was assassinated. So I grew up with those stories. And my father came of age during Ghana's independence movement. And so in a lot of ways, the struggle for freedom for Black people, for Africans across the diaspora, were stories that I came up with. And then when I moved to Atlanta, that was cemented even further, and that so many of these other stories were things that I was beginning to encounter. Then I went to Morehouse College, and that in a lot of ways crystallized some of these experiences and helped further shape the man that I am.
Yeah. I have a few buddies of mine that are Morehouse alumni, and I knew them beforehand, and when they came out the other end, it's like almost completely different men. I love the environment that creates for us. With that said, you know, you wear so many different hats.
Yes.
You said you were just in court yesterday.
Yes.
As the civil rights attorney, right?
I sure was.
Man, so as a civil rights attorney, as a scholar, as an artist, we're going to talk about your music as well. When did these paths first intersect for you?
So in a lot of ways, it's something that I'm beginning to see in hindsight. Were things that were building all along, and that there were moments I was preparing for and didn't even realize it. In terms of the whole attorney, that came when I was a younger man. My parents had a conversation with me when I was in high school, and they're like, you know, what do you want to do when you go to college? Because college was already a given. And I told my mom I wanted to major in art because I also do visual arts as well. And my mama was like, I'm not paying for you to go to school to do art. She was like, you can do art in your own time. And so my dad said, I think you'd be a great attorney. And that's what really began to spark the idea for me, just thinking about what that could look like. And I took a mock trial class my last year in high school, did really well in that. So that was my major in undergrad. When it was time to go to undergrad, I was like law minded. And so did political science, pre-law, and did all of that. And if you had asked me then, my goal was professionally, I was going to go to law school, practice until I was maybe in my 40s or 50s. And then one day somebody would let me come and teach a hip hop class. It's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Because I
So you saw that vision from the beginning. That's
yeah, to some degree. So like it was still like hip hop scholarship was a thing when I was in college, but it was still in its early stages. But it was something that I love to do. I guess in all of this, my first love is the music. And so I was doing that before I was doing anything else. And I just never stopped. And so by the time I get to undergrad, not so like academically, I'm doing this pre-law stuff. But the thing that really shifted, I guess, the trajectory of my professional career is I started doing some volunteer work in the community. And when I was a freshman, my first semester, I started volunteering in a nearby school. And I met a young man who was 15 in the third grade who learned how to write his name the week before I met him. Wow. And like, that blew my mind because like, you know, you hear stories like that, but I grew up in an area where illiteracy just was not a thing. And it was only because my parents had the presence of mind to say, we're going to live in a suburb that has a good school district. And so I didn't have any control over that. And neither did this young man either, but he was expected to compete against students from the type of school that I went to. Right. And so I said, I have to do something about that. So I made it my purpose to do that. And so I continued working with educational nonprofits. And not only was I doing that, but ended up creating a mentoring program with a friend of mine at Morehouse, who's actually a civil rights attorney today too. But that's what really lit the spark to teach. And one of the educational nonprofits I worked with had a summer program and I participated in that. And the goal was during the day, they would have college students like myself, and we would teach middle schoolers like math, science, English, or history. And then in the afternoon, they were like, if you have an area of expertise, you can teach a class. And I was like, well, I love hip hop. So I made a class about hip hop. And so my colleagues were like, yo, you could teach this in college. I was 19 at the time. And I was like, I'm a 19-year-old. Ain't nobody gonna let me teach this class in college right now. But that was really where the seed was planted. And then when I graduated from undergrad, I started working at a school in Atlanta that housed a nonprofit that I worked for and volunteered for when I was an undergrad. And so that was the first time it became bivocational because I was working at the school teaching a religion class, and then I was working at the nonprofit too. And then things just kind of grew from there over time.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting for me to hear you say this because, you know, music is a full-time job in itself. Yeah. It can be, at least for depending on the route that you go and the hats that you wear. But for you to do the things that you're doing in civil rights law, the things that you're doing on the collegiate level, the things that you're doing in the community, and still to have the time to create, I believe you have 4 albums, correct?
Somewhere in that range. So like, because like, I don't consider, well, it's 5 if you consider one that I haven't made publicly available. I released it right after I graduated from college. I'm like, I'd like to re-record that. Right. And so, but it's technically 5, but 4 is great.
Crazy. And it's not like you just, because, you know, when you hear that story of when you have a goal yourself, creatively, I had that same thing. My father is doctorate. He's had that history. We've had these conversations. We bumped heads when I was younger. I want to be a rapper. No, you need to go get your higher education.
Absolutely.
But I think the interesting thing is that those that I've seen go that route have had to kind of give music what they had left energetically and creatively, but you have gone above and beyond. I see something here that said you won a John Lennon songwriting contest. And
bro, you did the homework.
And the other things that I did a little homework. Come on, the professor's here. You can't come talk to the professor if you have not done your homework. But I see you have a John Lennon songwriting contest win. So it's somebody who is very serious. When you close one book and you open the writer's book, you're very serious about your craft. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about your music specifically?
Sure. So in a lot of ways, my music is an outgrowth of who I am. And so you've heard that I'm a civil rights attorney. I'm an educator, husband, and father. I'm a man of faith too. And so just in a lot of ways, my music just reflects that reality. I like to say that I talk about the world as it is and how it should be. And in an effort to make music that's timely and timeless. So trying to talk about what's happening in our world, having something to actually say about it, say something that's meaningful. And a lot of that, it sparked for me just realizing that, and aside from my love for music in a broader sense and just the culture more specifically, just how universal it is.
Yeah.
There are people who won't sit in my classroom. There are people who I may not represent in a courtroom. There are people who may not come to church with me, but they'll listen to a song and we might go to the same concert together. And in that way, like I used to say in some of my shows, that hip hop and my car got a lot in common. They both make a lot of noise and they're also both vehicles, right? And so
That's good. That's good.
And so I try to transport my listener to a vision of a better world and what it can look like. And so my most recent work, just to add some specificity to what we're talking about,
Sure.
is called Train of Thought. And in that, so my wife came to me like years ago and she said, some of your earlier work didn't get the attention that it should have. I think you should get a jazz band together and do a live recording of some of your favorite songs from that and put that out.
Right.
And so I kind of started and stopped that project a couple of times just because life's, you know what I mean? And so what ended up happening is I got a grant via the Black Music City series. It's put on by WXPN, WRTI, and Rec Philly in Philadelphia. It was a means in which to empower Black creators in the region. And so I used that to put together this band. We did a live recording at Rec Philly's Live Nation stage. And it's called Train of Thought because we fused John Coltrane's style of jazz with some of my older songs. And so we did jazz renditions of the production in the spirit of John Coltrane. So I try to do stuff like that. And so the songs cover an array of different topics, but that's just kind of like a snapshot of some of what I'm talking about and what I do.
Speaking of vehicles, how did this vehicle of life eventually lead you to Temple University?
Man, it's God's providence. It's a short answer. But what I would say to that is, so I was practicing law in the Philadelphia area. I graduated law school during the last major recession. So the subprime mortgage crisis, all of that hit the legal field really hard. And so there are really great attorneys and people who were at the top of my class who were losing positions left and right. And so I was really grateful to have a good position at one of the larger law firms in the region and ended up getting let go from that. And so in the process, while that happened, I was still kind of looking for other positions in the law, and just the market was very difficult. And while I was in between positions, I just so happened to meet a friend of a friend who was a professor at Temple at the time. And we're just talking about music, kind of like what we're doing right now, talk about jazz and hip hop and just where the culture was and stuff like that. And then he basically tells me that he teaches a class at Temple and he was unable to do it anymore. He wanted to know what I'd like to be considered. And I said, what's the class? And he told me that it was called Hip Hop and Black Culture. And I was like, ain't no way you teach a hip hop class at the university. And he's like, no, I do for real. And I think you would be a great fit for it.
Wow.
And so I was like, I almost fainted. Because again, for me, this is like a vision that I would love to do. I'm thinking I'm 20 years away from something like that.
Right.
And so what ends up happening, he's like, I can't make any promises, but I'll get you an interview with the department chair. And so he calls me, that was a Wednesday night. He calls me Thursday and says, can you meet the chair on Friday? And I said, I'll be there. And so I went, interviewed with the chair, and was really grateful to have made a great impression on him. And so before I left, he said, look, you got the gig. Go talk to our department administrator. She'll get you the paperwork. That was about this time, actually. It was like the end of July in 2011. And so that led to me teaching one section of hip hop and Black culture. I had 27 students. And it was, for me, it was a learning experience for both of us. It was my first time teaching at the post-secondary level. So did that and just built a great rapport with the students, got really great feedback from them. And it was something that I found that I loved in ways that I didn't even imagine that I would. And so they ended up asking me to come back. And then, so I came back and taught the next semester, taught 32 students the next semester. Then they didn't offer the class for a year. And then they realized that they wanted to re-offer the class. They called me back and then they said, we'd like you to teach the class, but this time will you be willing to teach two sections? And it was like 37 in one, 34 in the other. And it just kind of grew from there. And so like each semester, like I was getting a larger class sections, getting more students, and then just trying to figure out how I could make that course itself an experience. And so that's when I started bringing in industry professionals and artists more regularly and things like that. And just over the years, we've been really fortunate with some of the artists who've come through. Wyclef has come through twice. JID came through, La Russell has come through, Freeway has come through, Toby Nwigwe, Nell, Lecrae, Andy Mineo. I saw you just did his video the other day. Prop, your boy Prop came twice.
He hit me on the phone the other day, or he DM me the other day. He was like, "Yeah, I've been in there twice."
Yeah, Prop is incredible. Chill Moody was the first friend of the class. Chill Moody came very early on and came every semester. And then people like Sean Smith, Bree Stees, Mayamina Youssef, like just a great opportunity to be able to not only showcase the culture, but to bring so many different practitioners and come in and say, we talk about it, but now you can hear from their own vantage point. And then just over time too, that I started getting asked to teach other courses, just kind of wrap up the answer to this question. So they would say, can you teach a class about mass media? Or you have expertise in law, will you teach constitutional law? Will you teach a law and mass media class? Will you teach a race in the law class? Can you bring a legal lens to hip hop? And just all of these types of things. And the last thing I'll say about this particular thing is that someone asked me a similar question recently, and I told them there's an old quote that says, success comes when opportunity meets preparation. And in a lot of ways, I didn't realize I was preparing for this moment to happen when it did.
Right.
And so, and when it comes, I was adjuncting at the time. That's a part-time professor. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know in terms of categories and tiers of professorship, but I treated it like I was a full professor. So I prepared diligently for class every single day. I was writing, contributing articles and journal articles. I was speaking at conferences. I was periodically doing media, things like that, because that's what I knew a professor did. And so as I got further into academia, started learning just what expectations were, and things like that, I was like, oh, I'm already doing that. And I've been doing that for years. And so, but that's how I got started. Like I said, it was really providential in so many different ways that I even got an opportunity to be considered. It was a perfect opportunity for me to begin. And then I had the freedom to do it too. Because if I was still working at that law firm, I would have turned it down. Because like I was making good money. My wife and I had just gotten married. My daughter was on the way at the time that I got laid off. So when I was at the big firm, my wife and I had been married about a year. My daughter's on the way. We had just bought a house, been in there for a little while. And had I had that law job, I would have stayed there. Just because
all the responsibilities.
All these responsibilities. But I had other plans. And so here we are.
God tends to do that, doesn't he? It's those moments where you're like, no, God, why are you going here? No. Yes. Well, you know what? That was a better plan than what I had. Okay,
God's plans for us are better than ours, and I learn it every day. Because, like I said, if you had asked me then what my career would have looked like, it would have been very different. Or if you even asked me what my career would have looked like when I was 19, I had a very different answer. But I wouldn't trade what I'm doing now for either of those iterations of what I thought I wanted back then.
Yeah, I can't help but shake my head because me remembering my freshman year of going to Orange Coast College, and I wanted to focus on my music full time and work the job that I had. My father was trying to convince me, like I said, he's the doctor in the family, and or he has a doctorate. And then my mom didn't finish college, but she was like, she said she found the best presentation, they're divorced, but she found the best presentation. She saw me working on music and she said, it'd be a little bit easier for you to get through this process if you maybe took this Orange Coast College about, music theory or this and this. And it was my introduction into that environment. But I quickly saw, you kind of had to pick your experience in order for it to be engaging, especially if you're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So I want to make sure that we give you your roses because at that time, that just didn't exist. So I'm hoping that the Temple University students are seeing it. I know the folks in here are seeing it. That's why they're showing up. Shout out to all the DIYers here. But this is a blessing because there was a point in time where I would bring up, I would have an assignment, for instance, in my small business class that I took in my freshman year, and I brought up hip hop, and it was a laughable conversation in that room because of the people not being of the culture. But we're not in that time. We're in this 2025. Shout out to Elliot Wilson. He calls it the dot era. And because of that, anything involving this gentleman, Kendrick Lamar's name, is going to get a lot of press run, a lot of attention. It absolutely caught our attention on this end when we heard that there's going to be a course at Temple University that is going to be talking about not only Kendrick Lamar, but his effect on society, being from all these different things that I want you to give the specifics of. But the first question I have for you, what inspired you to create this particular course about Kendrick?
Again, it was providential. What I'll say in short is that, so I for years taught a class called No City for Young Men, Hip Hop and the Narrative of Marginalization. And I was talking about how hip hop communicates the lived experiences of people in urban America. And it's like, it don't matter where you go to, like South Side of Chicago, the Ninth Ward, the West Side of Atlanta, Compton, East New York, people are telling the same stories, especially through the culture. And so I was using that as a lens and saying, we can look into people's lives by this music, and using the literature of the lyrics as a portal to a better understanding of these things. So I've been teaching that class for a number of years. I've been using Kendrick's music in that class for about 10 years. Wow. And it was a process where over time, as the class was growing, I said, Kendrick has enough to where we could teach a course around him. Mm-hmm. And so the idea germinated back then, but specifically more recently, I was talking to my department chair about this time last year, and she was talking about how I should create a new course. And so we went back and forth with a couple ideas. And then she was like, some of the ideas are good, but I don't know if they're good for right now. And I said, well, what about a class about Kendrick? I've been talking about that for a while. I've been thinking about that. I have a sample syllabus I can put together for you. I've been using his music in class. Some colleagues of mine just wrote a book about him. I'm quoted in there, so I could potentially use that. She said, I love that. She said, send me a syllabus and let's see what happens. Right. So I sent her the syllabus. And to be honest with you, like, I didn't know what happened after that, because she said, I'm gonna look at it and we'll see what happens. And she said, I like it. It looks really good, but I'll put it through the process. That's what I mean by I didn't know what happened. Right. And then they announced that it was accepted. And I was like, oh, it's accepted. That's cool. It's up. We can do the class or whatever. And so they announced it, I believe, in late February, early March. And then it just it was exciting. It was exciting on campus.
You set the internet on fire. I'm seeing pages that I've never seen bring up anything academics related. That is not I promise that is not a pun. Anything academic related. I have not seen them bring up anything that has to do with a college course, but I see people who are not only excited, but even folks here. And this is one of my questions. I want to wait for this question, but I have folks here who are asking, is it open to the public? And I know I'm not a Temple University student, but to see that kind of excitement, I think says a lot in my own head about the different experience that people have when engaging with an artist like a Kendrick Lamar, right? There's a certain level of art, a high level of art, a bar that he sets with every project, almost with every feature, in which he is preparing you to do some thinking. He's preparing you to still engage and enjoy the experience as it is. But I want to know from you, especially someone who's been covering this who's been not covering, but mentioning Kendrick within your course and curriculums for the last 14 years, why Kendrick Lamar specifically? Now, there's a million reasons why, but why are your reasons specifically why you wanted to center this on Kendrick?
What I would say is that his art speaks for itself, and in a lot of ways it captures the plight of Black life in America, particularly for people of our generation. So Kendrick's a few years younger than me, but we're in the same generation, right? So, and so you can learn so much about how people have navigated the various components of Black people, particularly of America, through the lens of his music. And what I mean by that is we'll talk in a scholarly way about housing segregation and redlining and devaluing of property. We'll talk about the war on drugs and mass incarceration and the carceral state. We'll talk about the explosion of violence and drug culture and things like that. But those policies and after effects had impacts on people. There are real people who are living out the dynamics of what it meant to navigate the terrain of communities that were altered by that. And Kendrick's music reflects that. And not only does it reflect that, but it gives a lens into not only the people who are there and their experiences, but their dignity, the journey towards self-actualization and the imagination to see yourself better than the conditions that birthed you. And then beyond that, he's a master craftsman, like you mentioned. Every single one of his projects is objectively excellent. I know that there are people who don't like him. I get it, right? He may have hurt your favorite artist's feelings. I understand that.
Hold on.
You're gonna have to tell the truth.
Oh, don't mind if I do. Continue. I'm sorry.
He
Continue.
may have hurt your favorite artist's feelings, but I'll say this because I don't want to poke the bear, but I'll say this. So you can say that I might prefer someone else's art over Kendrick's. I can understand that. You can even say I'm squeamish about language and some of his topics, so I can't endorse some of his content. I can understand that too. But I think we can all unequivocally say that Kendrick Lamar Duckworth's output is objectively excellent. And if you don't agree with that, everyone else does. He has 22 Grammys. He has a Pulitzer Prize. He has #1 albums. He has a stadium tour that he is selling out across the world. No rapper's ever done that before. Like there are rappers who've done stadium tours like J&M did the 2 days in Detroit and New York. 50 has done stadium tours overseas. Travis Scott has too, but no one's done a North American stadium tour before. And so that's worthy of inquiry. And what I would say to that is, if we can look at Shakespeare and his impact on literature, if we can talk about Beethoven and Chopin and teach about them in post-secondary institutions, we absolutely can talk about Kendrick Lamar.
Hello. Glad you said that. Well, for the not even for the naysayers, but just playing devil's advocate in this conversation, you know, hip hop in its most pure form has always been kind of known as the CNN of what's happening, right, in culture, what's happening in the streets, what's happening in these different regions that you highlighted. There's a lot of artists who tell stories that are their own versions of that, and you know they have their own catalogs and they've done it in a very unique way. What do you think separates Kendrick so aggressively to where this is not the first time that I'm hearing about, you know, folks wanting to somehow incorporate this into their curriculum? But what is it for you that aggressively separates him beyond the numbers? I mean, even that's a factor beyond the numbers. What is it that you're seeing specifically that allows him to live in that space by himself?
What I'll say to that first is that my hip hop and Black culture class talks about all of this. People talks about the culture as a whole. So if you want that, we do that. And then I'll say that people like Dr. Regina Bradley teaches a course about Outkast. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson has taught a course about Jay-Z. My colleague, Dr. Aaron Smith, has created a course about Tupac that I had the pleasure of teaching before. So there are other courses. So I'll say that. But as it relates to Kendrick, he is the standard bearer of the generation. He's a defining voice of a pivotal point at the time of the culture. And again, his output, I think, is what really sets him apart. And this is not to disparage anyone else, but you could pick almost any song of Kendrick, any album of Kendrick since his major label debut, and you could arguably say that would be the best album in most rappers' catalog. So just a level of excellence. And that's, again, I'm not gonna say names because people get upset, but I'll give you a basketball analogy, right? So December 2005, Kobe dropped 62 points in 3 quarters against the Dallas Mavericks. He outscored the Dallas Mavericks in 3 quarters. They only scored 61 points. Phil sat him down because he's like, we've won the game. We don't need you. We'll save you for this road trip coming up. For most ball players of Kobe's generation, that would be their best game.
That's enough.
Almost a month to the day, Kobe drops 81 against the Raptors.
Yeah.
Because Kobe is different. And in that way, Kendrick is different too. I think Kendrick has set himself apart from his generation. And I think Kendrick has distinguished himself as an all-time great who can be mentioned across generations, not just against other rappers, but I think we can start having the conversation about where he fares in the broader conversation of music as a whole.
The first thing that pops into my mind is like the first few seconds of Man in the Garden, where he's kind of getting you an idea as a listener, the type of dedication that he has to the craft.
Yes.
And speaking very openly about that. And, you know, you can't see it now, but a poster that's on my wall is Mamba Mentality. And you Kobe recognized that in Kendrick. And he said that out. He said, who do you think would remind you of as being a rapper version of who you are in basketball? And he straight up said Kendrick. And I don't think that was just because of the music, just because of the output. There's a certain level of dedication and tenacity.
Yes.
Even after you've won major, a lot of rappers get very comfortable. And, you know, he seems to be one that's like, no, the best is yet to come because that's the way that I'm setting it up. Something I saw in some of the more details about this class is you're taking an Africological. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, there you go. You did right.
Okay. What is an Africological? Africological? You know, they have something here called pronunciations. They hate me for it. What does an Africological lens mean in the context of this course?
So that's a great question. So Africology is a school of thought, a theoretical framework. It's an outgrowth of Afrocentricity. Afrocentricity is the formal study of Africans centered in centering their perspective, right?
Mhm.
So oftentimes, for example, we might see the people of Africa and across the diaspora studied and examined, but it's often from an outsider looking in vantage point. But Afrocentricity literally centers the perspective, the vantage point, the mores, the viewpoints, the ontology of Africans. And Africology just grows that. So Africology says, we're going to study the creation, the life, the perspective, the dynamics of Africans and their culture from an Afrocentric perspective. So it's a school of thought. Think about it like sociology is a study of human culture and development. Philosophy is looking at thought and the like. And so Africology is a school of thought. And so my department is a Department of Africology and African American Studies. That's a department that I'm teaching it out of. And so oftentimes, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because oftentimes academics, we talk in ways that's inaccessible to everyday people. So they're like, what does that word mean? You just use a 5-syllable word. You just use this SAT word there. What does all this mean? But the shortest answer to that is we're going to look at Kendrick Lamar from the vantage point of someone like a Kendrick Lamar. And we're going to center not only his perspective, but also the perspectives of those who are similarly situated, as we're looking at how did Compton go from a upward middle class, multi-ethnic neighborhood to what he describes in Good Kid, Mad City, or what he describes in and then talk about, like, he gives you a lens into that. It's like Jay says in Renegade, take you to the hood without riding around. Like, that's what Kendrick is doing. And so he's offering you an illustration to that. So we're going to read scholarly works from people, we'll read books and journal articles, and then we'll listen to music and talk about how the music in a lot of ways is like a picture. It's like a movie.
Yeah. See, and that's what makes it so, that's what makes me so excited about this course, is that, you know, usually when I was presenting, I had what was it? It might've been was it the Introduction to African Studies? I forget what the actual class was, but it couldn't have been that. It was basically where they would, the professor would go over different moments in history, and Black American history, where she introduced us to the Invisible Man book. You know, we went and talked about all these different things and had these conversations. With that said, you know, I hope I'm gonna get a brain fart right here. What was the question I wanted to ask you on that one? Skip it. It doesn't even matter. The question I have for you next in that is, how do you feel specifically? You touched on this, but how do you feel Kendrick's story specifically reflects broader systems in Compton and beyond?
Sure. So I think one of the brilliant ways Kendrick tells stories is just how he gives you some multiple perspectives and just what it looks like. So let's look at Good Kid, right? On Good Kid, Mad City. He talks about the terror of the red and blue in the first verse. And he's talking about, they'll never respect a good kid, Mad City. But he's talking about the violence, the gang violence of the Crips and the Bloods. And then in the second verse, he's talking about the red and the blue police sirens. They'll never respect a good kid, Mad City. He's talking about intra-community violence and state violence that's descending upon the same body. And he's giving you a lens into what that looks like to be a young Black man trying to navigate Compton, when you got to fear from your peers, and you also have to fear these larger systems that might try to eradicate you too. And so that's going to give you, so we can talk about police brutality, and we should, and interrogate that, examine that, and talk about the policies that lead into police brutality being a constant scourge. And then we can talk about, what does it actually feel like to feel terrorized in your hood? And then we could talk about how so many of the people who study these phenomena say the safest communities are the ones that are the best resourced. And so you look at a community like Compton, it makes sense that it has so much violence because of these other external factors. And then this is what it looks like day to day. He just told you in a song.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I'm talking about as it relates to that. Or like in Fear, he talks about the fear that he had at 7, 17, and 27. And like, what does that look like from different vantage points? To fear your parents, to fear survival outside, and then fear losing it all. You finally escape all of this, and what happens if you lose everything? And so, like, again, that's why you can look at this and see so many different things. You can look at the plight of people in his neighborhood, like Keisha's song, Sing About Me, I'm Dying About Thirst. Like, he's given us so much to explore as it relates to his content.
The thought came back to me as you were speaking about that. It's the cinematic nature of his audio.
Man,
is that you could give somebody a song, and if you haven't lived the experience, they're a little bit limited in terms of how they can, relate to it or empathize with it outside of the words. But the fact that you have something like A Good Kid, M.A.A.D City that exists, and it's having these skits where these breakdowns, you're hearing the gunshots, you're hearing cars skirting off, you're hearing different kind of conversations going back and forth between him and his crew. I think that makes it just that much more intense from a student's perspective. As you tell them these stories, and then he so vividly paints these just in the audio. We haven't even talked about the music videos that you could add to that. But that is intense.
One thing I want to add to that too, just really briefly, is just how brilliant that album is. And what I'd say to that, so you talked about this with Punch when y'all did the interview back in April, how there are industry standards and expectations for what a major label release was supposed to be, especially in hip hop. There was a formula at the time. You're supposed to make a lead single. You're supposed to have your girl record. I know we hate that term, but you're supposed to have that. You're supposed to have something that feeds your day one fans, and you should have a potential fourth option for a single. And you should be able to have that on the album. So if people only hear 4 songs, that should drive them to wanting to buy the album. And he does all of that, but he does it within the sequence of the album. So like, he gives you a lead single with swimming pools, but he doesn't just give you some mindless exuberance. He gives you this lens into escapism and substance abuse, and how so many people around him try to escape their reality with substance abuse. And in the context of like the girl record, so to speak, he does poetic justice, but it's again within the context of the broader story. It never deviates from what he's doing. And then like his day ones get to see like his lyrical display on something like Backseat Freestyle that's somewhat reminiscent of Rigor Mortis, but again, it's within the context of the album. So, like, he's not deviating, it's not gimmicky. And then he still does something like Don't Kill My Vibe, that again, if you want a fourth single, you've got something. And so like, but it's still authentic, it's still telling the story, and it's doing so with these layers and these textures. And it's just like, again, like so many of his peers just are not doing that. And that's why and I'm not I for real, there's no shade.
You're talking to this community is very pro what you're talking about, so you don't have to make any other. I respect you, but these folks is like, yes, finally somebody in that environment who gets it.
Absolutely. Because like I say no shade, because I mean that, because like even as a practitioner myself, I know what it's like to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, to take a risk and things like that. But it's another thing to say that I don't think you lose anything by saying that this person excels at this thing, or this person has distinguished himself. I don't think you lose anything by saying that. Like NBA players saying that LeBron is still that guy 22 years in the league. I think there's nothing wrong in saying that. Like, you can question his legacy and where he stands and where he stands today, but like, I think he's unequivocal in just his mention in the pantheon. And I think Kendrick is the same way.
Big up in LeBron doesn't take from Shea. Especially Shea the MVP, Shea the finals winner. It doesn't take anything away, and I think that's a broader lesson that I'm hoping this era of hip hop is, just speaking in general, is able to like really find peace in, because there's a lot of folks who feel like if you big up one artist, that's when you get the internet culture involved, and they say, "Oh man, chill out on the glaze," and all the crazy things these kids say. I finally get to say that I'm 40 now. I get to say these kids. Speaking of which, here's a side quest question I got from you. A side quest question. I've never used those words in that order. Since the news of this course was out there on the internet, I know what it's like. Just if I wake up and I say, "Hey man, this Kendrick song that I've been listening to on GNX, man, I love it." And they're like, "Stop the Drake hate." And it's like, excuse me, that had nothing to do with your Canadian friend. With that said, I'm very curious. Have you been catching that kind of heat online? Especially, I see that you've been retweeting a lot of these and thanking these platforms for sharing about this course. Have you been catching any of that heat?
Oh, absolutely. Every day. multiple times every day. At its peak, it was several times an hour. And I just ignore it. I don't, for me, there's no space in my day to feed that negativity. I don't think most of it is coming from a genuine place, because when I go and look at the accounts, most of them look like bots, handful of followers, account just created within the last 2-3 months, saying really inflammatory things. And so like, some people I think are genuine fans and talk reckless and things like that. And it's just like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to feed into your negativity and insecurities that you might have around this, because one, I have priorities that I need to see throughout the day. Like, I don't have time to go back and forth with you all day. And beyond that too, I really want to lean into feeding into the positivity. So like, what you feed will grow. And I don't see the need in feeding into that negativity, but it's every day. It's like, it's every day. It's worst on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. It's the worst there.
Mama name on Twitter. I'm gonna call it Twitter too. That's Twitter.
that part.
That part, so,
right? Yeah. So it's every day. I'm like, at its peak, it's a few times an hour. But the thing is, like, I oftentimes will mute you and go about my day. Now you're talking to yourself, and like, and then an hour later, I forgot what you said, and I've gone on to do something else. Like I told you yesterday, I was in court for most of the morning, and like, I wasn't even thinking about all of this. And then, so it's like, ain't nobody got time for that.
Well, and I'm with you, and I salute you. At times, when I've kind of made the commitment to occupy my time with other things, like you said, like, right, just find other ways to occupy your time, because they can loop you into some very illogical conversations where you feel like you're now defending intelligence in hip hop. You're defending thinking in hip hop, and that's something I will fight to the end. But there's certain things that are not worth that conversation. But switching gears in that, why do you think now is the right time for this course to exist?
To be honest, again, I'm going to keep going back to it. It's Providence. Like I said, I've been using Kendrick's music in class at least 10 years. And just, this was the opportunity. So my department chair, Dr. Ama came to me and asked me to create a new course effectively. And this is what made the most sense to me. I said, I've been teaching about him for years. My colleagues wrote this book. They quoted me in the book. There are other books out there about Kendrick, like The Butterfly Effect by Marcus Moore. There are dozens of journal articles. And he's got the discography, he's got the influence. And so when I proposed the course, that's before the Super Bowl performance, that's before GNX comes out, that's before the tour. The beef, really, like, the beef was like what it was, but like, still, it wasn't even based on that. But like, honestly, it was Providence. Like, it was supposed to happen now, because it could have happened sooner, but I don't know if it would have gotten the same attention.
Yeah. And you spoke about it a little bit earlier, that you've had, some very successful artists that have come and been guest speakers in what you've done. Do you plan on having guest speakers for this particular course? I mean, I don't want to give away too much, because I know you're still building the curriculum, but do you plan on having guest speakers that maybe?
Absolutely. So I hope I can make an announcement here, but so okay. So I do have some people who are coming. So you have graciously accepted an invitation to come to the course. So you will be visiting the course. I've said this, man, thank you for coming through. Like I've told you privately, I'll say publicly, you're an important voice as it relates to all of this. You've known many of these people from the beginning, so you can speak from a firsthand perspective, but you also are a practitioner. You make your own music too, and do a great job at that. So you understand what it takes to sit down and create at this level. And with this platform that you've built, you also are now an important voice as it relates to that. So I've got you coming through. Cole Cohn from the Dissect podcast, we're talking about him coming through.
Shout out to him.
So I got something really exciting planned for that. So I'm just looking to schedule to formalize a date for him and you. Got some other people coming through as well. Some of which I haven't said publicly yet, but I've said y'all's names publicly. So,
and I know we haven't discussed this. Like what people got to understand, but outside of texting, but the last week, maybe, this is really our first time having an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation. But I do want to make sure that I say, if there's any, if I need to send a message over to Punch just to piqued the interest or whatever the case may be,
please
let me know.
I was already going to ask
make
you
sure that I make this information gets relayed to that side, because I know that opens up a whole nother side of folks who are very, very close, a whole lot more closer than I am to the source.
First of all, thank you for that. I was already planning to ask you that because I know you and Punch are close. I have reached out to Punch, but I think some of the information I have for him is old. And so, but I would absolutely love for Punch to come through. Again, he's seen all of this from day one. He's got the perspective of an executive, of an artist, and even mentor, colleague, all of that. So absolutely would love to have Punch come. And honestly, any of the TDE, PG Lang fam, like any of them, obviously they have an open invitation. I've reached out to as many of them as I can. I'm hoping to hear back from some of them. And so we'll see. I try not to tell people, I try not to tell my students somebody's coming until like I'm 100% sure, because in my hip hop and Black culture class, I booked these artists to come, and one artist who will remain nameless, his management team came to visit to talk about hip hop fashion, because they were talking about a new sneaker deal one of their clients had. And so he was like, hey, can I announce that my artist is coming? He was a pretty big artist. And I was like, sure, you can announce it. The kids go crazy, right? Yeah. And then he didn't confirm with the artist before he announced to the kids. And the artist he was like, hey, I'm working on an album. I'm in Atlanta, I'm in Miami. I can't like step away right now. So he never came. And so like ever since then, like, unless I got the confirmation, like I'm not gonna say that someone's coming. But listen, any of obviously Kendrick himself, if he wants to come through, he has an open invitation. He can come anytime he wants to. But any of the TDE, PG Lang fam, like, and affiliates too. So even like folks like Terrace Martin and Thundercat and like Bilal and people like on the periphery, like who've been TDE adjacent. But obviously anybody within the camp, absolutely would love and welcome an opportunity for them to come through. I've got some industry, like I said, execs coming through who can speak from the label perspective. And I also have, like I said, you and Cole, Justin Tinsley from ESPN. He's going to come and talk to us about the Super Bowl performance. So he and I've talked about that. So we got a few colleagues coming through, like a few people like y'all, but like, listen, if you want to put the bat signal out, please.
Come on now. I just want to make sure I'm not stepping on any toe, because you have a very, I can tell just talking to you in this time that, you plan things out in a very specific way. And that's why your success rate has been so high. It's because you map these things out, but you leave yourself open for when guys are like, all right, let's pivot. And you're like, all right, I trust where you're going with it. So I will absolutely do that. I'll reach out to them today. What do you hope students walk away from after taking this course?
My hope is that they have a better understanding just about the various components of Black life and Black expression, and just how, again, like we talked about before, so many of the things we talk about in abstract and theory have real impact on people's lives. And so, like I mentioned earlier, how like my career trajectory changed when I met that young man who was 15 and in 6th grade. I learned a statistic has a name and a face when I met him. And my hope is that my students can see that when we talk about redlining, when we talk about underfunding schools, when we talk about housing segregation, when we talk about the carceral state and mass incarceration, the war on drugs, that has a real impact on people. And there are people who grew up in that environment. And like Kendrick said, we survive outside all on the music. Like, talking about that not only made a way to escape, but like rose entire families out of that, changed the trajectory of entire people's lives and generations. So like, I'm hoping that they leave with a better understanding just about these conditions and the real life implications. Hope that they also see that hip hop is what I say participates in a continuum of Black expression. Like, what I tell my students is that hip hop didn't fall out the sky 52 years ago, but hip hop has people, has ancestors. Hip hop's ancestors are spirituals, jazz, blues, reggae, disco, funk, R&B. Like, it has relatives that it came from. In the same way that I tell my students, you didn't fall out the sky 2 decades ago or whatever, and hip hop didn't either. But it's rooted in Black culture and Black expression. And that expression couldn't be suppressed, even under some of the worst crimes of recorded history. And hip hop is here because of that. So I hope that they can see that. And then obviously, like a lot of them are Kendrick fans, so hopefully they'll have a better understanding of Kendrick too. Because one of the things that caused me to want the students to sit with his music some is I saw how quickly some of them were misinterpreting what he was saying. So like when Damned came out, for example, I heard some students talking about the album and they completely misinterpreted the overarching theme of the album and some
Mhm.
of the connecting pieces. They just loved how some of the songs sounded. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, do you know what he's talking about? And I started like peeling back some of the layers. They were like, I had no idea. So I came
Mhm.
to class the next day and said, we're going to listen to the album. We're going to listen to the album. We're going to song by song. We pulled up the lyrics on Genius and
Right.
listen to the album and read the lyrics. And then we would stop when the song was over and talk about it.
Mhm.
And so hopefully that's another thing. So like walking away from all this, hopefully that you have an understanding of how urban America came to look the way it does and its impact on real people's lives. Two, that you look at hip hop as a part of a broader spectrum of Black expression and how and why it exists the way it does. And then lastly, that you have a better understanding of Kendrick's art.
Yeah.
And so that's my hope people come away with.
Man, we salute you. And it's helping me to understand also too, a point that I've been trying to drive home on a channel is that one of the things I think that makes Kendrick's music so unique is that no matter what level of thinking that you want to do when you sit down with music, there's some kind of prize for you. There's some kind of
Mhm.
entertainment or conversation or something that will engage you on whatever level. If you're at a level where you just care about beats and the way somebody's voice sounds, well, he'll give you these sonics that'll make you, be fully entertained. If you're someone that's on the other level that's trying to see the social implications of things that are being reflected and mirrored within his music, you can have those high level conversations and probably even go further than maybe where he intended these
Absolutely.
conversations to go. So I think that's what's so dope. Here's $1 million question that I know they in here getting antsy about. Is it only open to Temple students,
Oh,
or
man.
are you trying to find a way to kind of open this up to folks who all of a sudden got this interest in going to college? I'm proud of y'all. I'm proud of some of y'all.
Yes. So I'll give you the long answer. I'll give you the short answer, then a long answer. The short answer is right now is presently for students who are enrolled at Temple University.
Mhm.
The longer answer is I'm looking for a way to respond to this overwhelming outpouring of love, support, and just interest in the course. I've literally seen like tens of thousands of people talk about they want to take this class, which is staggering to me. But that's a great opportunity to engage people, like you said, help people think, analyze things. And so my department chair is out of the country right now, I believe, but when she returns, I'm going to try to figure out a way between her and maybe the registrar to figure out a way that we can make some of this accessible to everyday people. Because for me, so much of my passion around higher education is making it accessible, right? I mean, we're here because a man who hasn't even gone to college created something that's worthy of studying in college, right? In
Crazy.
Duckworth, Kendrick talked about his daddy hoping one day he'd see college. When he was talking about Ducky, he's the he. He's talking
Mhm.
about right there. And so, like the fact that Kendrick hasn't even gone to college, but we're talking about him at a university is mind blowing to me. And I want people who are officially enrolled to have access to that. I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out a way that's feasible because, like I said, like the amount of people who've made that request is just, like I said, staggering. But I'm really grateful for the attention and the interest and the enthusiasm. And so we're gonna figure something out one way or the other. And I'm gonna let you know when I
Come
figure
on.
it out.
Yeah, let me know. Let me know. You know what I mean? So we don't have to go send an agent in there so that we can like get a bootleg version of it and then say, I don't know where I got this from. No, we salute you, and even trying to figure it out, because anybody who's been in that environment, ironically enough, I spoke a little bit about it, but my father, who has, he's a professor, he got his doctorate and all these different things. He became a doctorate, but he was so pro education and so not that hot for the music, right?
Mhm.
Full circle journey. He had me come and talking to his class,
Look at that.
right? He had a class that was specifically talking about, race and the way that the way these conversations are represented in media. And
Mhm.
he's like, you know what? Music is media. I'm gonna have my son come in here and talk
Look
about
at
these
that.
things. So it just shows you the power of hip hop, which is why I'm glad that we're living in a climate where we're having conversations that are above some surface level things like who's dating who, the gossip and shoot. We're talking about breaking down lyrics and annotating them in an accurate way. But I do remember, I told you, I have a history, even when going to college myself, where hip hop wasn't always seen as a teaching tool.
Yes.
What are some of the misconceptions about using hip hop as a teaching tool, in your opinion?
So I think the misconceptions around hip hop are the ones that have been there from the very beginning. So you remember when hip hop first emerged in the way we recognize it, people said it wasn't even real music. They said, how you got music and you're not playing on instruments, you're not singing nothing, y'all not talking about nothing anyway. That's what people were saying from the very beginning. And people are still saying that now. They're acting like it's not a real intellectual exercise. But the first thing I try to get people to see is that this is actual music. Rappers, regardless of how you might view their music, rappers at their core are poets. And they are using various forms of poetic device when they're creating their lyrics, some more than others, but they are using various forms of poetic device and bending the contours of language in ways that other art forms are not. And hip hop is the most definitive cultural expression of the last half a century. There are places without running water and electricity that hip hop has touched. Hip hop is, and it started in a room not much bigger than the ones that we're in right now. Right. And it's gone across the world. Think about these kids took music players and turned them into music instruments. They said that you ain't got to sing, but you can make a song. You may not be able to play an instrument, but you can still compose, because sampling is still a form of composition. And even these lyrics are incorporating various forms of poetry. So you can do literature studies, you can do cultural studies, you can look at historical analysis, you can do sociological inquiries, you can look at it from an Afrocentric lens, you can do all of that together. And so I've had colleagues over time ask me questions like that. And that's how I tell them. I said, you might sit down and talk about the context from which Beethoven wrote the Fifth Symphony, and that's important. Or you might have another class that just sits and listens to it because they think it's a brilliant piece of art. I said, we do both in my class.
Hold on, wait. I love that. Oh, I wish. Where were you at? I probably would have finished college. Where were you at?
I was in college with you.
Exactly. There you go.
In college at the same time.
Man, I'm telling you, one professor could really change the trajectory. And I had that experience. Shout out to Professor Morgan. He's the one that introduced me to marketing. And the first time I ever thought about marketing being an art form was when he would come into the classroom and have these kind of conversations where he would stop trying to give me the stale marketing vocabulary and say, well, it's like what you do in music. This is those type of engaging conversations can keep you there a few more semesters. And it did for me, because he was like, you can get your marketing certificate if you stay around. So I salute the work that you do, because there's so many folks that need to be exposed to someone with your style of teaching.
Man, thank you. And just to kind of give you a lens into even what I'm talking about, one of the most important lectures I do every semester is we look at the second verse of Jay-Z's 99 Problems and talk about racial profiling and police brutality. And so we play the song, and then we walk through, this is where he gets the law right, this is where he gets the law wrong, and this is its implications for you. And so we get a chance to talk about a real issue that people are having. And I've had people come up to me after that class and say, you have given me information that could save my life. I had a student one time almost 10 years ago come up after that lecture. He said, I'm going to the police academy the day after I graduate. You've changed the way I'm going to do my job.
Wow.
From one lecture. And so when people are like, what are we going to talk about in this class? It's like, what can we not talk about in this class? There's so many different things that we could talk about. And in that particular class, we talk about the Fourth Amendment, and we go through Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. So we're looking at all these different cases. And then we talk about stuff that you've seen in the news. And then, but the entry point was Jay's experience in 94 on 95, getting pulled over in New Jersey by a state trooper. And that gives us a lens into this conversation that they may not have walked into otherwise.
Right. Man, it's exciting, and shout out to everybody who's here. Shout out to the 600 that have come here to the live stream, and you could tell it's a conversation they've been highly engaged with, even after this hour that is here. Something that we talk about here often is shout out to one of my subscribers, Afro Butterfly. She always says the average reading level is at a third grade reading level. I think about what happened during the pandemic.
Mhm.
Even I have a son who, it was severely speech delayed, and then he went through the
Mhm.
pandemic and
Oh, man.
was doing speech delay. He was doing speech classes over Zoom, and it just was not connecting. I saw that from the lens of an infant. I can't imagine what that's having an effect on when you're talking about teenagers and younger adults. But I kind of feel like I get an experience when I see them not having the ability to break down lyrics, or even violently fighting back to this idea that music should be more than a vibe. It's
Mhm.
like, I don't want to sit here with my thesaurus and and listen to music. And that's just not the experience that it is for us.
Mhm.
Why do you think that, and this is more of a selfish question, but why do you think that even in that environment where we know literacy rates
Mhm.
have been documented to be low, why do you think that this is still such a engaging conversation for folks who are either fighting against it or people who are fighting for it? What do you
Mhm.
think about this time period makes this such a conversation that we have today,
Man,
like with
that's a
breaking down
great
lyrics and
question.
all that?
That's a great question. I'll say a couple of things to that. One, again, I think it speaks to the power of hip hop that it engages people's intellect in a way that it creates an atmosphere for some people to want to break down lyrics, right?
Mm,
And so, again, that's a part of literature studies that you're even wanting people to engage poetry in that way. Like, why did you say that the way that you did? So I think that's part of it. But to your broader point, I think you're exactly right. The pandemic broke things in people that I think it will take us a long time to fully understand. And education is one of those areas where people suffer. The and it wasn't for a lack of trying, but it was this very difficult time for everyone. And I think there was an erosion of skills that happened across the country, across different levels. And I think we're still suffering from that. And also in the after effects of No Child Left Behind and this shift in focus
yeah.
on what was being taught in schools and methods of evaluations in primary and secondary education. So, like elementary through high school, like the method of evaluation shifted. There was a less emphasis on reading comprehension and literature studies and things like that. That had an impact for people. And just two, we're in a broader societal time where there's a lessened emphasis on critical thinking.
Mm,
So I tell my children all the time and my students too that we're in an era where we have access to more information than any other humans have in the history of mankind, of humankind.
hmm
But we still have this heightened level of ignorance because people aren't engaging the information they have access to or don't know what to do with it when they do. And
hmm.
that's a failure in two parts. So the one, just this, the lack of desire to, that's a failure of imagination of what you can be and access. And
Mhm.
then to not knowing what to do when you get is a failure of how we have taught people to engage information. And I think that's really hard. But it's one of the many things I love about hip hop as a culture and rap music specifically. If you want something that just sounds good and you don't have to think about, you can get that. But if
Right.
you want something that's going to offer you a deep discourse, make you think and reevaluate things, you can get that too. And
Mhm.
there's some people, the very rare ones, who can do both at the same time. And
Mhm.
so, like, and again, that's just what's so compelling to me, because like, because the average verse, at least back when we had more industry standards, was 45 seconds. A 16 bar verse is 45 seconds.
Right.
20 bars is a minute. And so to be able to pack so much information in a minute, like especially like in the era that we grew up in,
Yeah.
people like really like saying paradigm shifting things
Mhm.
in 45 seconds. And but I do think there's work to do, just more broadly, just in that people have a poor appetite and for things. And I think it's because we've taught people to consume the wrong things. And we gotta we have to change that.
And it looks like it's changing whether we like it or not. We like it, we love it, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, but there's some people who are fighting violently against it, and I'm not using that word loosely.
Mhm.
They're saying that hip hop is dead, and I'm like, what
Mhm.
hip hop are you talking about? They say hip hop is dead. I can't believe that they're getting. But I've always felt like hip hop was at its best when it provided balance, and it's
Yes.
been so imbalanced. You could say 15 plus years. There's been music that if you navigate and you go find these places where these artists exist, they're there. but in terms of it being celebrated the way that it is, in terms of the algorithm showing favor to this, brand of music, I think there's a lot of things that are having to happen. I'm very curious, how do your students respond when you use music as a lens for serious conversations?
Man, they love it, and it's really from the very first day. I've been really fortunate over these 14 years. We have again like paradigm shifting conversations every class, and I tell them on the first day. I said, yes, you were attracted by the title hip hop and Black culture, but we're going to talk about an array of different things. We're going to talk about the legacy of slavery. And we're going to talk about what it actually did to people and made them property. We're going to talk about police brutality. We're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about misogyny and the objectification of women. We're going to talk about the hip hop and the N-word. We're going to talk about racial disparities in the criminal legal system. We're talking about all of that. And I tell them, listen, if that's not for you, that's fine. There's no hard feelings. You're still within the window to change this course. And if you enroll in another course, there's no hard feelings. But if you stay, we're going to have these conversations. And I tell them, and when we start those conversations, I said, listen, when you share, I want you to be mindful of the fact that everyone doesn't share your worldview. And then 2, I want you to be mindful of the idea that to the extent that you want to debate, attack ideas, not people. So listen to what people are saying and respond to what they're saying and not what you think that they're saying. And so and we have really robust conversations in the class, like every semester. So, the Kendrick class we haven't taught yet, but right now I'm talking about my hip hop and Black culture course.
Right.
And so I break that course into thirds. The first third, we talk about the roots of Black expression and West African culture. And then we talk about in that same section, we'll talk about hip hop's evolution from West African music all the way to like spirituals to now. So we do that in the first third. The second third, we'll do hip hop history. Start a little bit before 1973, and then just kind of walk it all the way down. And then the last thing we do is these topical discussions. And so that's where we talk about these heavy hitting topics. It's like, now that you've got a foundation, let's look at how the culture presents this thing. And that's also where I bring in artists during that window of time too, during that last section. And so we have really great conversation. Like every semester. It's been one of my greatest joys professionally to teach, because like I said, we talk about everything. And like we talk about it like both in an anecdotal way. So sometimes students are sharing their personal experiences, and then we look at like, what does like the research say? And then like, let's talk about real world stuff too. I'll give you one more example. So I've been teaching in like the Black Lives Matter era, for example, right? So my first class was 2011. Trayvon Martin's murder, 2012. So like every semester, there has been a high profile police killing or extrajudicial killing in some way, or killing or something like literally every single semester. And what was happening is like, when it would happen, we would stop and pause class to talk about it. But it got to the point where I was like, it's happening. We're just going to roll it into the syllabus. And so like, we started talking about it every single semester. It's like, we could look at what happened this year, because like, God forbid it's going to happen again, but like usually it does. And then we'll look at like the broader spectrum of the problem. And again, there are people who've come in with opposing viewpoints, but who have left saying, you've shifted the way I think about this. Like I said, I had a police officer.
Yeah.
I said, he said, I'm going to police academy the day after graduation, and I'm going to do my job differently because of this conversation.
Yeah. That's that. No, we gotta end it right there. I have 2 more questions for you, but I'm grateful for your time. Appreciate your transparency and also the work that you're doing, because there are a lot of people who still have their biases when it comes to the rap and it comes to hip hop. So many of my peers, and I'm sure that because these are part of your through lines. You're an artist as well, and that sometimes introducing yourself as, what do? I'm a rapper. Immediately that does something to their brain. It bakes in some of these biases, but you do something that helps folks who think they overstand what the music is doing because of the language. They've already, that's just that. You break it down in a way where it's like, you know what? I never thought it had that much depth, and I have to check myself in the process. I'm curious, how do you measure success when it comes to creating change through education?
Oh, wow. For me, I look at success very differently than I once did. And I presently look at success of, did I do what God called me to do? God put me in this position, and am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing with it? And so, like, I do what I'm supposed to do and leave the results to God, right? So I come in, I'm faithful, I'm diligent to what I'm supposed to be doing. I show up when I'm supposed to, where I'm supposed to be, and I've done the work before I got there. And then leave the results where they may. And I've been really fortunate to be just like overwhelmed, which was an outpouring of just like impactful stories from my students. I've had thousands of students at this point over the course of 14 years. And every single semester, at the end of the semester, I'm having students say things like, "You're the best professor I've ever had. You changed the way I think." I've had people saying, "You're the first Black male teacher I've ever had. That's shifted the way I think about education in that way. And just like, you've been a role model to me in that way." I've had students coming up to me crying at the end of class, talking about like, I did not know that it was like this. But and I've had other students say that, "I'm going into this field because of what you've done." And so for me, that's success, right? So to be able to have that type of impact on students and for it to happen every semester, I'm just really grateful for that, because it's truly been every semester from the very beginning. And I'll tell you, that first semester, I was nervous. I was young. I was not that much older than my students. And so I didn't tell them how old I was. I was 29. And one of my students came in one day and she said, "Professor, how old are you?" And I was like, why do you need to know how old I am?" She said,
What do you get at?
she was like, "I looked you up the other day, and like, because you seem really young, but you've done a lot. So I was just curious." And so I told her, and then one of my students was like, "My brother is older than you." And then another one of my students was like, "I've dated men older than you." And I was like, whoa. I was like, "That's too much. I didn't need to know that. You could have kept that to yourself." But sharing. But I say that to say I was really nervous, especially because I wasn't that far removed in age from them. It was my first time doing this, and just things worked out even better than I could have imagined that they would have. And just been really grateful for that. And so, like, that's how I look at success. Really, just I come in. You described it very well. Like, I work really hard to make sure that what I do is my best, but I kind of like, leave myself open to, like, God might have a different direction than I intended to go in, or there might be a different opportunity that I didn't perceive before. And so just kind of being open to things being different than I may have imagined them to be.
It's such an interesting way to put it, because I struggle with that at times, in separating being passionate versus being emotional about the things that I have laid out for what I'm doing. Because when I commit myself to something every single day, the single second I wake up, it's dedicated to feet on the ground, and this is what's going to get accomplished. But as you say, as you were alluding to, we playing and God laughs. I can't tell you how many times I've had, neck pains, back pains, welcome to your 40s pains as I'm sitting in front of a computer, and it's like, we must pivot. What is the lesson that needs to be learned here?
Absolutely.
But with that said,
one thing I'll just say to that, just really briefly, like, when I was in middle school, I thought maybe I'll go to the NBA. I loved basketball. I'm 5'10". Ain't no way. I'm 5'10", and I'm not that good at basketball. I figured out very quickly that was not the move for me. And even like when I first started making music, like, I was thinking, like, I had a certain idea for the stature that I would ascend to, and especially in an industry that's so dominated by numbers and specific accolades, and people measure success in that way. What you see time and time again is when people get there, they talk about how empty it feels. And because you've put your ladder against the wrong wall and climbed the wrong way, right? And so Shoparaka, an artist out of Atlanta, says that often, like, you put your ladder on the wrong wall, climb the wrong way. And so I think it's just really important to measure success differently than we're taught to, because you can get what you reach for and lose what you had. And so that's why, even like early on, I said, like, I do all these things, but I feel like my most important work happens in my house. And so for me, that's a success. Like, I have loving marriage, beautiful children, like that's a success that I can come home to. And so I do my work when I leave my house, and then I come home and do the other part of it. And so, like, to me, that's success, to be able to sustain my living in that way. And the last thing I'll say about that is I love the way that you're shifting the perspective on that, right? Because so often in music, people act like if you don't have a platinum album, or if you don't have a gold or platinum or diamond single, you're not doing anything. If you don't have this many followers on social media platforms, you're not doing anything. But what people are forgetting in that is that if you can create and sustain a living by doing what you love, that is a success.
You won.
And the fact that you're able to do that and teach other people how to do that, that is successful. That you're able to create a meaningful career and sustain your living, take care of the people in your household based off what you love to do, and have not compromised your integrity and your morals in the process, like, that's successful. And there are so many people who made it to the other side who would trade places with you, and people watching don't understand that sometimes. And so
sometimes I didn't understand it. I'm sitting here taking everything personal. Like, why is this person who obviously got more money in their pockets and they're in a better, they're more popular. What would they have to be jealous of me? I'm not gonna walk around thinking anybody. But when the closer you get to, how can I put this? The closer you get to the heat, the more you recognize it's not always fire.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like sometimes anger can give off. Sometimes, just a meaningless, someone that is just like a locomotive with no destination can also emit heat. Yeah. So there's so many times that I saw things. I think Andre 3000 said everything that everybody with the gold ain't for the fall. Everybody,
everyone with dreads ain't for the cause.
Yeah. For me, it's the same kind of mindset, and that I looked at people that were the most successful in what I thought were the most successful, and a lot of times they were the most depressed because they felt like there was something empty. And I saw that very early on. You're talking about, God setting up these moments where you recognize it and you see it, and you're like, there's a different journey that is in mind for me. This is the last question I have for you, and I promise it brings all of this stuff back home. There's a lot of artists I know, young, probably in their, they're younger artists. There's like, I guess, mid-age artists when it comes to music or hip hop as we've known it, 30s. And then we get into even the unk area, as I like to call us, in the 40s. There are some artists doing some amazing things at a time and age where you just don't see that in hip hop. Even Kendrick is in his late 30s and he's having his biggest years in his already successful career. You're looking at the Clips who are releasing an album today, and the conversation about them has been almost just as, or even more hot than it was 15, 16 years ago when they were working with each other again. A lot of the topics of ageism around hip hop is shifting, all of that. But with that said, while these young eyes and ears are listening to you, they're listening to, and they're seeing the success of artists who are operating at a high level, at an elite level of penmanship, songwriting, all that. What would be your message to all those that are listening who say, you know what, one day I hope that my art creates something where a professor would want to have a course about what I'm doing? I know Kendrick is very unique in that. And I'm not saying become the next him, but for those who are seeing this and not knowing that through this vehicle of hip hop, this is available, what would kind of be your message to them as they're living in this great, what I call a hip hop reset? What would be your message to them if they want to aspire for their art to have that kind of an impact?
I would first say that they need to be purposeful. Like, what is your reason for making music? I think you need to really interrogate that and question your motives and have a real answer, have an honest answer as to why you're doing it. And then from there, I think if you continue to choose to make music from there, I think you need to be authentic. You need to be intentional and do the very best you can with what you have at every stage. Be diligent, be faithful, work like everything depends on you, and pray like everything depends on God. Like, I think you really, and the thing is, all the people who separate themselves and distinguish themselves, you see that. So we talked about Kendrick's work ethic. When Punch was on here with you, he talked about Kendrick's work ethic and the work ethic of the entire team. We see that in sports too. Like, to make it pro, you have to have a certain level of work ethic to get there that distinguishes you from the masses. But then to be elite as a pro, you got to work even harder than everyone else. And to be an all-time great, you got to even work even more than all of them. And so I really think in a lot of ways, just purposeful, intentional art that's meaningful. Like I said in one of my songs, we pause to breathe, to speak. That means sacred is prose, right? So it's like when you're taking the time to record something, is it worth recording this moment in time? Is it worth you pausing your life to say this? Like, are you saying something worth listening to? And and if you don't have something worth listening to, sit down until you do. Read, study, listen to other people. Because like, that's how you can get to the point, because every thought that you have does not need to be recorded. But you can hone your craft. And I would say hone your craft, work hard. And the other thing I would say too is I think this is true for every industry. I think you need to be good to people too. I'm really big on like just treating people well at every stage. And I mean everybody. Regardless of whether they can do something for you in return. The golden rule is real. You should treat people how you want to be treated. It goes a long way. And so, be mindful how you treat people, make the best art that you can, and make it worth listening to. Like, have something to say. That's what I would say. And don't be so caught up in some of these traditional metrics for success, right? Most of the people that you admire were not consumed with these metrics. I want this number of Grammys. I want to sell this amount. Like, so we're here talking about Kendrick. All the people who were there early he just talked about the music, right? And they all talked about just how great he was. When Corrupt had him on We Ballin' on the 2K soundtrack, he's like, this kid is incredible. When Dre sees Ignorant is Bliss, like, he's Dr. Dre. He sees stuff all the time. He sees that video and he's like, who's this kid, right? Punch said the first time he met Kendrick, he had heard the mixtape. He's like, this kid's going to be something. And it's because of that work ethic, that craft, that intentionality, wanting to have something to say. Y'all can do that. You should do that too.
Man, one more time for Professor Timothy Welbeck in the building. Man, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for the work that you're doing in so many different departments too, man, where you know, there are certain people who have an idea of how to do it. There's certain people who will try to tell you how to do it. And then there's people who just go and do it in whatever capacity that they're able to, but then also to wherever they set their mind to. And you've been in all of these environments, and you've really been a practitioner in more than one field. And I salute you, because it's inspiring to me. And I'm grateful we had the opportunity to sit down with you and talk to you. I know the story has been taken off, and it kind of irks me when I'm like, y'all don't want to. Can we put the professor's name in the tweets? I get the headline. I get the vitamin and the brownie. I get it, but can we talk about the vitamin at least? I get it, but no, I
had the same conversation with my wife. I'm like, listen, this is not even like for my own sake. I'm just like, for the sake of journalism, if you want to talk about something, you should go to the source, right? And so so to the extent that you can, like, you may not be able to interview everybody that you talk about, but like, there's so many people like who are like playing telephone with the different articles. Like, I've sat down with a handful of people, and like, what happened is the people I sat down with will accurately report what I said. And then people will like skim one of those articles and then like make a video about it or make a tweet about it. And I'm like, you didn't actually read what Eric wrote. You didn't actually read what they said. Like, you didn't read what Alana wrote. Because like the question that you're asking is in paragraph 2, the third sentence, or like just little stuff like that. And I'm like, and that's not even about me. And like, so like when you reached out, I was like, 1, I already loved and appreciated what you were doing. And then 2, I was like, this is a great opportunity to talk about this directly, because people have so many questions. It's a great opportunity to do that. And so I really appreciated the opportunity and grateful that you had me on today.
Man, hip hop is what did it. The music is what was the great connector with all of this. So
Absolutely.
I'm grateful that we have this time period where we can have these kind of conversations, because, you know, as some people right now who are going through the emotions that their vibe music is not the only thing dominating the space, understand how some of us felt when we knew that hip hop could give us more. And we, you know, there just wasn't a space that they carved out large enough for all the diverse artists that represented that,
Yes.
that higher level. Like it boggles my mind that we lived through a time where those who were the most skillful, those who were the most in depth with their art, the most skillful writers in music were seen as uncool. We're seen as irrelevant. And that's why that's my only selfish intent in covering all of this, is that critical thinking is cool. I want to make sure that I amplify as much critical thinking as I can. I don't care who, who say what. This needs to happen, and you're so crucial to that, because you're doing it in a space that a lot of folks just don't have access to.
Man, thank you. I appreciate that, and yeah, I'm just excited just for the opportunity and all that's coming with it, and just will continue doing this work.
Man, where can people find you, or if you want them to, if they're coming with positivity, where can people find you or reach out to?
So I have a website. It's just my name, TimothyWelbeck.com. It's just one L. It's pretty much like encapsulates everything that I do. And then I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter most actively. Again, it's just my name, Timothy Welbeck, one L. So if you come in peace, you know what I'm saying? Like, come and show love. Let's have a conversation and all of that. But yeah, I'll just leave that at that.
Man, thank you again. One more round of applause for this gentleman, man. All right. So DIYers, I will make sure after this interview we timestamp and all that good stuff. I'll put the information in the show notes. For those asking, yes, I will be back tonight. I'm going to get on the phone with my guy Justin Hunt and see if he wants to do this clips listening party for this album coming out tonight, because we got to celebrate.
That's exciting.
We got to celebrate high end art, man. It is necessary, and then also too, when you have your project or whatever you have ready, just know that we're always going to be an outlet that would love to talk to you again.
Man, listen, I really appreciate that. I am working on something new. I hadn't really put anything together since the live album I told you about. And in a lot of ways, some of the inspiration to continue writing, one of my closest friends passed away in April. He was in a tragic accident, and he was like one of my biggest supporters. If I had one Spotify listener, it was him. Wow. And so he just was always encouraging with my music. And so I wrote a tribute for him that I was going to give to his sons, and like that kind of sparked the idea to continue going with some of the stuff I have. So I'm working on something right now. When it's ready, I'll put it out, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity to even come back and talk to you about it when I do.
We here. First of all, my condolences, and man, we wish you nothing but you and your family and your team, nothing but continued success. And yeah, we're glad to be another outlet out here for you whenever you should so utilize. DIYers, thank you once again for showing up, asking the questions, and tuning in. It will live up here on the live stream. Thank you again, DIYers. I will talk to you very, very soon. Also, Timothy, Professor Welbeck, thank you.
So much. Thank you. I appreciate you.
All right, talk to you soon.
All right.
DIYers, if you enjoyed this content, make sure that you hit the like button and maybe even consider subscribing. Come on, man. Stop being greedy. Peace.